Rachel had been hired to look after an elderly man who was in a vegetative state. One day, while they were alone, she approached him, and what happened next sent chills down her spine. The phone's ring shattered the quiet of Rachel's tiny apartment. She rose from her chair where she had been going over some notes and answered, expecting it to be one of her patients or their relatives. "This is Rachel Green," she said in her usual friendly and professional manner. "Good afternoon, Miss Green. My name is Ross Rufus, and I'm calling on behalf of my family. We have a job proposal we'd like to discuss with you," said a man's voice on the other end. Rachel was taken aback. She rarely received job offers from strangers. "Of course, Mr. Rufus. What is it about?" "Our family is in a tough spot and needs an experienced, trustworthy nurse. My dad, Frank Rufus, has been in a vegetative state for years, and we need full-time care for him at home," Ross explained. "I'm really sorry about your father. What specific care does he need?" Rachel asked, wanting more details. "Mr. Rufus needs 24/7 assistance, including feeding, hygiene, medication, and all the care required for a patient in a vegetative state. We've been taking turns looking after him, but it's no longer sustainable. That's why we're searching for a dedicated nurse for permanent care," Ross replied. Rachel took notes while listening intently. "I see. And how long would you need my services?" "For an indefinite period, Miss Green. Our father is 85, and sadly his condition isn't improving. Ideally, we'd want a nurse to live with him and take care of him at home," Ross explained. This meant Rachel would have to move to Mr. Rufus's house and dedicate herself to his care full-time. It wasn't her usual practice, but the situation seemed delicate enough to consider the offer. "I understand. And what kind of payment are you offering for this service?" Rachel asked. "We're willing to pay a very generous monthly amount, Miss Green. Our father is financially secure, and we want him to have the best care. We're offering $5,000 a month, plus covering all your living expenses at our home," Ross replied. Rachel's eyes widened. $5,000 a month. That was more than double her usual rate. For a moment she was tempted to accept on the spot, but chose to think it over carefully. "That's a very generous offer, Mr. Rufus. May I ask why your family is willing to pay so much for these services?" she inquired cautiously. Ross sighed deeply before responding. "The truth is, my father's health has declined significantly in recent years. My sister and I have our own lives and families, and can no longer devote the necessary time. We just want to ensure he gets the best care possible." Rachel wasn't fully convinced, but decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. "I understand. Let me think it over, and I'll let you know my decision. When would you need me to start?" "As soon as possible, Miss Green. My father needs constant care, and our current temporary nurse can't continue much longer. If you could let me know within the next few days, we would greatly appreciate it," Ross replied urgently. "All right, Mr. Rufus. I'll inform you of my decision as soon as I can. Thank you for the opportunity," Rachel responded. "I'll send you the contact information by email. We hope to count on you. Have a great afternoon," Ross said as he bid farewell. "Same to you. Goodbye," Rachel said before hanging up. She sat in thought for a few minutes, considering the offer. $5,000 a month was a significant amount, especially since the job was at the patient's home, saving her transportation and food expenses. However, the high pay made her somewhat suspicious. Was there more to this offer? Rachel was a nurse with over 10 years of experience and prided herself on providing high-quality service to her patients. She knew that taking care of a patient in a vegetative state full-time would be a challenge, but also an opportunity to put her skills to the maximum. Moreover, the money would be very helpful for her to save a bit and think about the future. After pondering the matter, she decided that she would accept the proposal. But first, she would make some discreet inquiries about the Rufus family and Mr. Rufus's situation. She didn't want to risk getting into trouble. Rachel checked her schedule and confirmed that she had no other important work commitments in the coming days. She sent a message to her current patients, informing them that she would be unavailable for a while, and then proceeded to draft a response for Ross Rufus. Dear Mr. Rufus, after carefully considering your offer, I am pleased to inform you that I accept the job to take care of your father, Frank Rufus. I am available to start next week if that date is convenient for you. Before proceeding, I would like to request some additional details. What is the exact address of Mr. Rufus's residence? Could you provide me with more detailed information about his current health status and the care he requires? Is there any other relevant information I should know about the family situation? I look forward to your response. Thank you for the opportunity. Sincerely, Rachel Green. She pressed the send button and let out a sigh. She was excited about this new challenge, but also a little nervous. She knew she had to keep her eyes wide open and not be dazzled by the generous salary. Her priority would be to provide the best possible care for Mr. Rufus. 2 days later, she received Ross's response with the requested information. Mr. Rufus's residence was located in an exclusive residential area of the city, in an imposing mansion worthy of a wealthy family. The medical details indicated that the elderly man had suffered a severe stroke 5 years ago, leaving him in a vegetative state. He required constant assistance for feeding, mobilization, hygiene, and medication administration. Regarding the family situation, Ross explained that he and his sister, Monica, were Mr. Rufus's only children and that both had their own lives and families, making it very difficult for them to dedicate the necessary time to their father's care. Apparently, the family had been taking turns to attend to him, but they could no longer continue with that arrangement. Rachel reread the information several times, trying to detect any sign of irregularity. Everything seemed to be in order, so she proceeded to confirm her acceptance of the job and coordinate the details of her incorporation. A week later, Rachel found herself standing in front of the imposing gate of the Rufus mansion, with her suitcases by her side. The butler greeted her and guided her through the luxurious gardens and hallways until they reached Mr. Rufus's room. Upon entering, Rachel could appreciate the enormity and elegance of the space. Mr. Rufus's bed occupied the center of the room, surrounded by medical equipment and monitors. Next to the bed, a comfortable armchair and a small table indicated that someone spent long hours there. "Welcome, Miss Green. Mr. Rufus is waiting for you," said the butler, indicating that she approached the bed. Rachel cautiously approached, carefully observing the elderly man lying there. His face looked frail and emaciated, but still maintained an air of distinction and elegance typical of a man of his position. He seemed to be sleeping deeply, connected to several tubes and cables, monitoring his vital signs. "Good afternoon, Mr. Rufus. I am Rachel Green, the nurse who will be taking care of you from now on," she said, softly, approaching him. To her surprise, the elderly man's eyes slowly opened and looked at her with unexpected lucidity. Rachel was paralyzed, not knowing how to react. Mr. Rufus observed her in silence for a few seconds and then gave a weak smile. "Welcome, Rachel," he said in a hoarse and broken voice. "I have been waiting for you." "How is it possible that you—" Rachel began to ask, but Mr. Rufus interrupted her. "Shh, calm down. We have a lot to talk about, but first, let me thank you for accepting this job," said the elderly man with a warm look. Rachel nodded, not quite sure how to proceed. "Well, it is a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Rufus. Let me introduce myself properly. As I said, I am Rachel Green, a nurse with over 10 years of experience. I will be in charge of your care 24 hours a day, and I will do my best to provide you with the best attention. I know, Rachel. I know you are an excellent professional and you will be able to help me, responded Mr. Rufus, his voice barely audible. Rachel frowned, increasingly confused. Forgive my question, Mr. Rufus, but how is it possible that you are so lucid? According to the information I received, you were in a vegetative state. Mr. Rufus sighed, his expression turning more serious. That is precisely the reason I have brought you here, Rachel. I need your help. Rachel moved closer to the bed, her curiosity growing. What is happening, Mr. Rufus? Is there something I can do for you? Yes, Rachel, there is something very important you need to know, said the elderly man, his voice filled with concern. My children, Ross and Monica, they want to get rid of me. Rachel's eyes widened, shocked by the revelation. What? How is that possible? Mr. Rufus nodded sadly. It is true, Rachel. My children have been planning how to eliminate me to inherit my fortune. That is why they hired you, to take care of me and thus be able to carry out their plan. Rachel felt her heart race. Everything was starting to make sense now. The generous salary offered, Ross's insistence that she start as soon as possible. It was clear that the Rufus family had something very shady going on. My God, Mr. Rufus, this is terrible. How is it that you are so lucid in your state? Rachel asked, still incredulous. It is a long story, Rachel. Let me explain, responded the elderly man, making an effort to speak. A few months ago, I woke up from my vegetative state. The doctors couldn't explain it, but suddenly I was able to become aware of what was happening around me. Since then, I have been pretending to be in a coma, waiting for my family to trust that I would never wake up. Rachel listened attentively, unable to believe what she was hearing. And why haven't you told your children anything? Why have you been pretending all this time? Because I feared for my life, Rachel, said Mr. Rufus, with a hint of sadness in his voice. Since I woke up, I have witnessed the plans that Ross and Monica have been plotting to get rid of me. They think I am still a vegetable, and they want to take advantage of that situation to murder me and inherit my fortune. Rachel felt breathless. All of this seemed like something out of a suspense movie. My God, this is terrible. What are we going to do, Mr. Rufus? The elderly man looked at her with determination. That is why I have brought you here, Rachel. I need your help to stop my children and expose their macabre plan. You are the only person I can trust. Rachel was speechless, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the situation. She had never imagined that her new job as a nurse would involve something so dangerous and disturbing. However, something in Mr. Rufus's pleading look deeply moved her. In the following days, Rachel immersed herself fully in her new role as Mr. Rufus's personal nurse. From the moment she accepted the job, she knew she would face a great challenge, but she never imagined the situation would be so delicate and dangerous. Every morning, Rachel got up early and headed to the imposing Rufus mansion. Once there, she diligently and professionally attended to Mr. Rufus, providing him with the care he needed. She fed him, mobilized him, administered his medications, and ensured his hygiene and comfort. Despite his apparent vegetative state, Mr. Rufus remained lucid and alert in Rachel's presence. They spoke in low voices, sharing information and coordinating the next steps to expose his children's sinister plan. My children usually visit me twice a week, usually on Wednesdays and Sundays, Mr. Rufus explained to Rachel during one of those intimate moments. It is crucial that during those visits, you pretend I am still in a vegetative state. We cannot raise any suspicions. Rachel nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. I will do as you say, Mr. Rufus. I will keep up appearances and do everything possible to protect you. The elderly man gave her a grateful look. "Thank you, Rachel. I know I can trust you. You are the only person I can trust right now." Rachel felt moved by the trust that Mr. Rufus had placed in her. Despite the dangerous plot in which she had become involved, she was determined to help him and prevent his own children from eliminating him. In the following days, Rachel was able to closely observe Ross and Monica's behavior when they visited their father. Both appeared solicitous and attentive, but Rachel noticed a certain coldness and distance in their gestures and looks. On several occasions, she caught them exchanging complicit glances or whispering to each other out of Mr. Rufus's sight. When the children left, Rachel would comment to Mr. Rufus on her observations. The elderly man would nod with sorrow, confirming Rachel's suspicions. "Yes, my intuition does not deceive me. Ross and Monica are planning something terrible. We must be very alert," said Mr. Rufus, his voice filled with concern. Rachel made an effort to remain calm and composed during those moments. She knew that any slip-up could jeopardize the fragile situation they were in. One afternoon, as Ross and Monica were leaving, Rachel accompanied them to the main door. Just before crossing the threshold, Ross turned to her with a serious expression. "Miss Green, I am glad to see that my father is in good hands. I hope you know that we greatly appreciate your dedication," Ross said, although his tone of voice sounded somewhat forced. "Thank you, Mr. Rufus. I am committed to providing the best care for your father," Rachel replied, maintaining her professional demeanor. As she watched them leave, a sense of unease settled in her stomach. She knew she had to stay vigilant. In the following days, Rachel continued her routine of caring for Mr. Rufus, always keeping an eye out for any suspicious activity. The tension in the mansion was palpable, and Rachel knew that at any moment the situation could escalate. Finally, the day arrived when Rachel and Mr. Rufus decided to act. They had gathered enough evidence to expose Ross and Monica's malicious intentions. They knew it would be risky, but they were determined to put an end to the nightmare. Ross and Monica arrived for their usual visit, and Rachel received them with her customary kindness and professionalism. She informed them that Mr. Rufus was stable and that there were no significant updates. Then she discreetly withdrew, leaving the siblings alone with their father. Once Ross and Monica were alone with Mr. Rufus, he slowly opened his eyes and looked at them with a cold expression. "Hello, my children," he said in a hoarse but firm voice. Ross and Monica froze, unable to believe what they were seeing. "Father, how is this possible?" Ross stammered, astonished. "Oh, I see you are surprised. You shouldn't be. After all, you are the ones who have kept me like this all this time," Mr. Rufus responded, his tone filled with reproach. Monica took a step back, her face showing a mix of fear and panic. "Father, I don't know what you're talking about. Us?" "Don't deceive me anymore," Mr. Rufus exclaimed, interrupting her. "I know all about your plans to get rid of me and inherit my fortune. You are monsters." Ross and Monica exchanged nervous glances, realizing that their facade had been discovered. Before they could react, the door to the room opened and Rachel entered, followed by 2 police officers. "What is the meaning of this?" Ross shouted, facing Rachel with fury. "Mr. and Ms. Rufus, you are under arrest for attempted murder and fraud," announced one of the officers, approaching them with handcuffs in hand. Monica let out a stifled scream, her eyes wide with shock. "You can't do this, we demand a lawyer," Monica protested, her voice filled with panic. "It's too late for that, Monica," Mr. Rufus intervened, his voice laden with disappointment. "We have gathered enough evidence of your nefarious plan. Now you will pay for your crimes." The Rufus siblings struggled uselessly as the police officers handcuffed them and led them out of the room. Their shouts and protests faded into the distance, leaving Mr. Rufus and Rachel alone. Rachel approached the bed, placing a reassuring hand on the elderly man's arm. "How do you feel, Mr. Rufus?" The man sighed deeply, a look of relief and sadness reflected in his face. "Relieved, Rachel, but also deeply disappointed. I can't believe my own children were capable of something like this." "I know, Mr. Rufus. It must be very painful for you," Rachel responded, gently squeezing his hand. "It's a shame it had to come to this. But I couldn't allow those two to murder me and take my legacy," said Mr. Rufus with a somber expression. Rachel nodded in silence, aware of the enormous emotional burden the elderly man must be bearing at that moment. After a few minutes, she dared to ask, "What will happen now, Mr. Rufus?" The man looked at her with determination. "Now, Rachel, we must ensure that Ross and Monica pay for their crimes. I can't allow them to go unpunished. You can count on me for whatever you need. I will do everything possible to help you get justice," Rachel responded with a look of resolve. Mr. Rufus gave a weak smile. "Thank you, Rachel. I know I can trust you. Together, we will ensure that my children receive the punishment they deserve." In the following days, Rachel and Mr. Rufus worked tirelessly to gather even more evidence and prepare the case against Ross and Monica. They scoured every corner of the mansion, meticulously reviewed banking and accounting records, and collected testimonies from employees and acquaintances of the family. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. Rachel accompanied Mr. Rufus to the court, providing him with all her support. It was a tense and emotionally charged hearing, with Ross and Monica Rufus facing charges of attempted murder and fraud. One by one, the witnesses and evidence presented by the prosecution demolished the siblings' weak defenses. Bank records, compromising communications, and Mr. Rufus's own testimony proved to be overwhelming. Finally, after hours of deliberation, the verdict was delivered. Ross and Monica Rufus were found guilty of the charges against them. Both siblings were sentenced to long prison terms, reflecting the severity of their actions. As the officers handcuffed Ross and Monica and escorted them out of the courtroom, Rachel could see the expression of anguish and defeat on their faces. Mr. Rufus, for his part, remained stoic, but Rachel could see the deep sorrow in his eyes. Once the courtroom had emptied, Rachel approached Mr. Rufus, placing a hand on his shoulder. "How do you feel, Mr. Rufus?" she asked softly. The elderly man sighed and looked at her with a mixture of relief and sadness. "Overwhelmed, Rachel. I never imagined my own children would be capable of something so heinous. I understand. It must be devastating for you to go through all of this," Rachel said, gently squeezing his shoulder with affection. "Yes, Ross and Monica were always ambitious and selfish, but I never thought they would go so far as to try to kill me," Mr. Rufus responded, shaking his head with sorrow. Rachel remained silent, allowing the elderly man to vent. She knew that despite the justice that had been served, the situation must be overwhelming for him. "Well, at least they have received their due, and now they will pay for their crimes," Mr. Rufus said, trying to find some solace in it. "That's right, and you are safe thanks to your courage and the evidence we gathered," Rachel reminded him, with a look full of admiration. Mr. Rufus nodded slowly. "Yes, I owe it all to you, Rachel. Without your help and dedication, I might not have been able to stop those two." "It was a team effort, Mr. Rufus. I am honored to have been able to help you in this difficult time," Rachel replied, giving him a warm smile. The elderly man returned the smile and took Rachel's hand in his. "I will be forever grateful to you, Rachel. You are an extraordinary person, and I know I can fully trust you." Rachel felt her heart swell with pride and emotion. The trust that Mr. Rufus had placed in her throughout this ordeal meant much more than a simple job. A sincere bond had been forged between them, a connection that went beyond the nurse-patient relationship. After that intense day in court, life at the Rufus mansion seemed to return to a relative normalcy. Mr. Rufus once again was alone under Rachel's care, away from his children's manipulations and deceit. However, the tranquility did not last long. One night, while Rachel was reviewing some records in the library, she heard a faint sound coming from Mr. Rufus's room. Alarmed, she hurried to investigate. When she arrived, she found a scene that left her frozen. Mr. Rufus was semi-upright in bed, gasping and with a look of panic on his face. Above him, holding a pillow tightly, was a familiar figure. "Monica, what are you doing?" Rachel exclaimed, quickly approaching. The woman, startled by the interruption, dropped the pillow and stepped back. "Rachel, I was just checking on my father," Monica stammered with a guilty expression. Mr. Rufus coughed with difficulty, casting a pleading look at Rachel. "Help me! Please!" Without hesitation, Rachel placed herself between Monica and Mr. Rufus, facing the woman firmly. "Step away from him, Miss Rufus. I know exactly what you were trying to do." Monica looked at her with rage, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and desperation. "You know nothing. I was just trying to help him," she defended herself, though her voice sounded shaky. "Help him? Do you think I'm stupid? I know very well that you and your brother planned to murder your own father," Rachel retorted, not taking her eyes off the woman. Monica visibly paled, realizing that her plan had been uncovered. That's not true. I would never do something like that," she insisted, though her voice betrayed the lie. "Enough with the lies, Monica. I know you two were behind all this, and now that you have been discovered, I won't allow you to harm Mr. Rufus," Rachel declared, with determination in her voice. Monica looked at her with desperation, her eyes filled with panic. "Please, Rachel, you have to understand, I just wanted my share of the inheritance. I couldn't let my father keep it all." "How dare you speak like that? He is your father," Rachel exclaimed, indignant. "You don't understand. Ross and I deserve that money. We are his children," Monica shouted, her composure completely breaking down. Mr. Rufus, weak but alert, watched the scene with horror. "Monica, please, you are my daughter. How could you do something like this?" The woman looked at him with a mix of resentment and guilt. "I'm sorry, Father, but this is the only way Ross and I can get what belongs to us." Without warning, Monica lunged at Rachel, trying to push her aside. "Get out of my way, stupid nurse. I'm going to finish the job my brother and I started." Surprised by Monica's violence, Rachel managed to keep her balance and pushed her back forcefully. "I won't let you. You will not harm Mr. Rufus." The two women struggled in the room until Rachel finally managed to subdue Monica, pinning her to the floor. At that moment, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by the arrival of several security guards. "What's going on here?" one of the men exclaimed upon seeing the scene. "Stop her! Monica Rufus just tried to murder her father!" Rachel shouted, not letting go of the woman. The guards reacted immediately, handcuffing Monica and dragging her out of the room by force. She kicked and screamed, cursing as she was taken away. Mr. Rufus, visibly shocked, watched everything with wide eyes. "My God, this is a nightmare," he muttered, clutching his chest. Rachel approached him, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "Calm down, Mr. Rufus. It's over now. You are safe." The elderly man looked at her with a deep expression of gratitude. "Rachel, I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't been here. That woman is my own daughter. I know, Mr. Rufus, but you're not to blame for what they have done. They are heartless monsters, Rachel said, gently squeezing his hand. Mr. Rufus sighed with sorrow. I never thought they would go this far. Ross and Monica were always ambitious, but this surpasses everything imaginable. Don't blame yourself, Mr. Rufus. You are not responsible for your children's despicable actions. Rachel consoled him with a calm voice. The elderly man nodded weakly, letting out a trembling sigh. You're right, Rachel. But it still hurts. It hurts to know that my own children wanted to murder me, Mr. Rufus said, his voice breaking with emotion. Rachel looked at him with deep empathy. I understand. It must be an enormous burden to carry that pain. But I want you to know that you are not alone. I am here to support you, Mr. Rufus. Mr. Rufus gave her a weak smile. Thank you, Rachel. I don't know what I would do without you. After that terrifying incident, security at the Rufus mansion was drastically reinforced. Mr. Rufus, still shaken by his daughter's attempted murder, remained under constant surveillance, with Rachel watching over him day and night. Ross, for his part, was also arrested and imprisoned alongside his sister. Both faced charges of attempted murder and fraud, and the prospect of spending years in prison seemed to have wiped out any trace of arrogance or confidence they might have had. In the following weeks, Rachel remained by Mr. Rufus's side, providing him with all her support and affection. The elderly man, although still recovering from the trauma, seemed to find a certain peace and serenity in the nurse's company. One night, while they were dining together in Mr. Rufus's room, the man broke the silence. Rachel, can I ask you a question? He said, looking at her with a serious expression. Of course, Mr. Rufus. You can ask me anything, she replied, placing her fork on her plate. Mr. Rufus sighed and adjusted himself a bit in bed. After everything that has happened, I wonder why you accepted this job. I mean, knowing how dangerous it could be. Rachel looked at him with a warm smile. Well, I must admit that at first I was intrigued by the generous job offer. But then, when you revealed the truth about your children, I knew I couldn't let you face that terrible situation alone. I understand. But even so, you risked your own safety by getting involved. Why did you do it? Mr. Rufus insisted with genuine curiosity. Rachel observed him in silence for a few moments, searching for the right words. I suppose that, deep down, your situation moved me greatly, Mr. Rufus. You are a noble and kind person who didn't deserve to be treated that way by your own children. Mr. Rufus nodded slowly. I understand. But still, you have done much more than any normal nurse would have done. You even put your life in danger for me. Well, you have shown that you can trust me. And I have also learned to trust you, Rachel responded, feeling a slight blush creep over her cheeks. Mr. Rufus looked at her with a mix of gratitude and tenderness. You are an exceptional woman, Rachel. I don't know how I will ever be able to thank you for everything you have done for me. You don't have to thank me for anything, Mr. Rufus. I know you would have done the same for me, she said, taking his hand gently. The elderly man gave her a warm smile and squeezed her hand lightly. You are a true friend, Rachel, and I will be forever grateful for that. From that moment on, the relationship between Rachel and Mr. Rufus grew even stronger. They spent long hours talking, sharing stories, and forging a bond that went beyond the simple nurse-patient relationship. Mr. Rufus, increasingly recovered from the trauma, seemed to have found a new motivation to live, and Rachel, for her part, felt deeply honored and committed to his well-being. Together, they closely monitored the legal proceedings related to Ross and Monica's case. Both siblings had been sentenced to long prison terms, which brought them some peace. However, Rachel knew that Mr. Rufus still carried the emotional weight of everything that had happened. One afternoon, while walking through the beautiful gardens of the mansion, Mr. Rufus stopped and looked at Rachel seriously. "Rachel, there is something I would like to talk to you about," he said with a grave expression. "Of course, Mr. Rufus. What's on your mind?" she replied, giving him her full attention. The elderly man sighed and looked at her with determination. "After everything we have been through, I have realized that my time in this world is not much longer, and I want to make sure my legacy is in good hands." Rachel looked at him, surprised by his words. "What do you mean, Mr. Rufus?" "I mean my fortune and everything I have built over my life. Ross and Monica have proven themselves unworthy of inheriting all that," Mr. Rufus explained with sorrow. "And I would like you to have it, Rachel." Mr. Rufus's words resonated in Rachel's mind, leaving her completely bewildered. Had she heard correctly? Was the elderly man really offering her to inherit his fortune? "Mr. Rufus, I don't know what to say. This is too much," Rachel stammered, unable to believe what was happening. The elderly man looked at her with a serene expression. "I know, Rachel. I know it is an unexpected proposal, but after everything you have done for me, I feel there is no one else I can trust with my legacy." Rachel shook her head, still stunned. "But why me? I'm just your nurse, someone who came into your life by chance." Mr. Rufus smiled softly. "Precisely because of that, Rachel. You are not like Ross and Monica, who only sought to benefit at my expense. You have shown to have a kind and sincere heart." The nurse looked at him with a mix of emotion and skepticism. "Even so, Mr. Rufus, I can't accept something like this. It is too much. Please, Rachel, let me do this. I want to make sure my fortune is used for good, and I know that with you, it will be in good hands," the elderly man insisted, taking her hands gently. Rachel remained silent, trying to process everything that was happening. On one hand, the idea of inheriting Mr. Rufus's enormous wealth seemed inconceivable, but on the other, the trust and affection the elderly man had shown her deeply moved her. Finally, she let out a sigh and looked at Mr. Rufus with determination. "Mr. Rufus, I deeply appreciate your trust in me, but I can't accept this legacy. It wouldn't be right." The elderly man looked at her with surprise. "Why not, Rachel?" "Because you deserve to enjoy your fortune. I am just your nurse, and accepting something like this would be taking advantage of the situation," Rachel explained firmly. Mr. Rufus looked at her with a mix of frustration and pride. "Rachel, you are an extraordinary woman, but you must understand that for me, you are much more than just a nurse." The nurse looked at him, not knowing what to say. Mr. Rufus continued, "Since you came into my life, you have been a fundamental pillar. Not only have you cared for me with absolute dedication, but you have also risked your own safety to protect me. That makes you someone very special to me." Rachel felt tears welling up in her eyes, moved by the elderly man's words. "Mr. Rufus, you have done so much for me already. I can't accept this legacy." The elderly man gently squeezed her hands. "After what Ross and Monica tried to do to me, I can't let my legacy fall into the wrong hands. And I know that with you, Rachel, it will be safe." The nurse looked at him with a mix of gratitude and fear. "But what if I can't handle something like this? I have no experience in managing a fortune." "Don't worry about that. I have trusted people who will guide and advise you in everything necessary," Mr. Rufus assured her with a reassuring smile. Rachel remained silent, overwhelmed by the offer. She knew that rejecting something like this could hurt Mr. Rufus's feelings, but at the same time, the idea of becoming the heir to all his wealth seemed too much. Finally, she sighed and looked at the elderly man with resolution. "Mr. Rufus, I deeply appreciate your trust in me, but I can't accept being the heir to your fortune." The elderly man looked at her with surprise and disappointment. "Why not, Rachel? I thought you would understand how important it is for me to ensure my legacy is in good hands." "I understand, Mr. Rufus, but I don't feel comfortable accepting something like this. You deserve to enjoy your wealth and use it as you see fit," Rachel explained, gently squeezing his hands. The elderly man looked at her with a conflicted expression. "Rachel, please, I need to know that my fortune won't fall into the hands of people like Ross and Monica. You are the only one I fully trust." The nurse sighed, searching for the right words. "I understand your concern, Mr. Rufus, but I can't accept something so significant. It wouldn't be right." The elderly man looked at her with frustration. "Don't you see how important you are to me, Rachel? You have risked everything to protect me. You are the only person I can trust." Rachel looked at him with tenderness, moved by the sincerity of his words. "Mr. Rufus, you are also very important to me, but I can't accept this legacy. It wouldn't be fair to you." The elderly man remained silent for a few moments, his gaze reflecting a mix of emotions. Finally, he let out a resigned sigh. "I understand, Rachel. I respect your decision, even though it hurts me. I know you are a woman of integrity and with a big heart," Mr. Rufus said, gently squeezing her hands. "I deeply appreciate your trust, Mr. Rufus, but I can't accept something like this. You deserve to enjoy your wealth and the years you have left," Rachel responded, with a look full of affection. Mr. Rufus nodded slowly, though his expression remained somewhat pensive. "Very well, Rachel. I respect your decision, but I want you to know that, in one way or another, I want to ensure your future is secure." The nurse looked at him with surprise. "What do you mean, Mr. Rufus?" "I mean that even if you can't accept my inheritance, I will make sure you have a good reward for everything you have done for me," the elderly man explained, showing a small smile. Rachel shook her head, ready to protest. "Mr. Rufus, it is not necessary. Everything I have done has been because you deserve it, not for a reward." "I know, Rachel, and that is precisely why I want to do this," Mr. Rufus insisted, with a determined look. "After everything you have sacrificed for me, you deserve to have a peaceful and secure life." The nurse looked at him with a mix of gratitude and concern. "Mr. Rufus, you don't have to do anything. You have already done so much for me. Please, Rachel, let me do this. It is the least I can do to thank you," the elderly man said, with a plea in his eyes. Rachel remained silent for a few moments, knowing it was useless to try to dissuade Mr. Rufus. Finally, she nodded gently. "Very well, Mr. Rufus. I accept your offer," she replied with a resigned smile. The elderly man smiled with satisfaction and gently squeezed Rachel's hands. "I'm glad, Rachel. I know you will make good use of what I offer you." From that moment on, Mr. Rufus and Rachel set about planning and securing the nurse's future. Although Rachel still felt uncomfortable with the generous amount of money she would receive, she couldn't help but feel a deep gratitude towards the man who had entrusted her with his legacy. As the days went by, Mr. Rufus seemed to grow more calm and peaceful. He had successfully uncovered his children's sinister plans and safeguarded his wealth from falling into the wrong hands. Now, he only had to enjoy his remaining years, surrounded by Rachel's companionship and affection. One afternoon, while strolling through the mansion's gardens, Mr. Rufus paused and gazed at Rachel thoughtfully. "Rachel, can I ask you something?" he asked gently. "Of course, Mr. Rufus. What is it?" she responded, giving him her undivided attention. The elderly man looked at her with a blend of fondness and wistfulness. "Have you ever thought about your future? About what you will do once I'm no longer here?" Rachel stared at him in surprise, unsure of how to reply. "Well, honestly, I haven't given it much thought. My main concern has been staying here, taking care of you." Mr. Rufus nodded slowly. "I understand. But now that you've secured my legacy, have you thought about rebuilding your life?" The nurse looked at him thoughtfully. "I suppose I have, though I haven't had much time to consider it." "Why do you ask, Mr. Rufus?" The elderly man smiled gently. "Because I want to know if you have any dreams or projects you'd like to pursue. Something you're passionate about and can achieve with the security I've provided." Rachel smiled softly at Mr. Rufus. "Well, I've always dreamed of opening a clinic that offers quality medical care to low-income individuals. Helping those in need has been my greatest motivation as a nurse." Mr. Rufus nodded approvingly. "I'm glad to hear that, Rachel. I think that would be an excellent project for you to channel your energy and skills into. But Mr. Rufus, opening a clinic requires a large investment. I couldn't do it without your generous support," Rachel said, still feeling overwhelmed by the elderly man's magnanimity. He smiled serenely. "That is precisely the purpose of what I have arranged for you. I want you to use that money to make your dream come true and help those who need it most." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Rufus, I don't know how to thank you. This is too much. I can't accept it." "Please, Rachel, let me finish," the elderly man interrupted gently. "I want you to use that money to change lives, Rachel. I know you will do it with the same dedication and compassion with which you have cared for me." Rachel squeezed Mr. Rufus's hands, deeply moved. "I will do everything possible to honor your trust, Mr. Rufus. I promise you that the clinic will be a place where thousands of people can receive the medical care they deserve." The elderly man smiled proudly. "I'm sure of it, Rachel. I know you will do an excellent job." In the following months, Rachel dedicated herself with unwavering determination to bringing her dream to life. With Mr. Rufus's generous bequest, she was able to purchase land and construct a state-of-the-art clinic featuring the latest in medical technology. Surrounded by a team of dedicated professionals, Rachel launched the initiative, offering quality care to low-income individuals who otherwise would have no access to proper medical services. Day by day, Rachel watched as the clinic became a beacon of hope for the community, filling her with immense satisfaction. She knew Mr. Rufus's legacy was being used for good, just as he had intended. Meanwhile, the elderly man spent his final days in the mansion, enveloped by Rachel's care and companionship. Witnessing her achieve her dream brought him a peace and joy he hadn't experienced in years. One afternoon, as they conversed in the library, Mr. Rufus gently took Rachel's hand. "Rachel, I want you to know how immensely proud I am of you. You've honored my trust in the best way possible," the elderly man said, his smile full of emotion. Rachel met his gaze, her eyes glistening with tears. "Mr. Rufus, it's all because of you. I'll never be able to thank you enough for your kindness and generosity." The old man squeezed her hand warmly. "No, Rachel. It's you who have given me so much. Your companionship, support, and dedication have been priceless gifts to me." They looked at each other silently for a few moments, recognizing the special bond between them. "Rachel, I have one more favor to ask," Mr. Rufus said softly. "Anything, Mr. Rufus. You know you can always count on me," she replied with a look full of affection. The old man gazed at her calmly. "When I'm gone, promise me you'll keep pursuing your dream. Promise me you'll continue helping others through the clinic." A tear slid down Rachel's cheek. "I promise, Mr. Rufus. I'll do everything I can to honor your legacy and follow your compassionate example." Mr. Rufus gave her a final smile and gently squeezed her hand. "Thank you, Rachel. I know you will." Shortly after, surrounded by Rachel's love, Frank Rufus passed away peacefully, leaving behind a life full of accomplishments and some bitter disappointments. But his greatest legacy would be the clinic Rachel had built with his generosity, a place where his spirit of service and compassion would live on forever. True to her word, Rachel threw herself into running and growing the clinic, turning it into a beacon of quality healthcare for the neediest communities. Each day she thought of Mr. Rufus and his example of generosity, working hard to make their shared dream come true. In this way, Frank Rufus's legacy would live on through Rachel's relentless efforts. With her noble heart and commitment to service, she changed the lives of thousands, honoring the trust the old man had placed in her.